Good morning students. I am Mrs. Govindammal, Assistant Professor of Commerce, SFR College for Women, Sivahasi. Now I am going to discuss about dialog boxes in Visual Basic. We know the objectives of dialog boxes. First objective, to know the concept of dialog boxes in VB. Second objective, to understand the message box and the input box function in VB. Third objective is to develop a program using the message box and input box function in VB applications. Now let us see the definition of dialog boxes. The dialog box is a temporary window for an application that accepts user response through mouse or keyboard to create communication and interaction between the user and the application. Dialog boxes are specialized forms that serve two basic purposes. Their primary use is to provide the information to the users. Some dialog boxes are more sophisticated and interact with the user, accepting input and possibly providing feedback. Example, opening a file, changing printer properties, notifications and alert messages. It is an important tool for Visual Basic programming language. Now let us see types of dialog boxes. There are two fundamental types of dialog boxes in VB. First one is modal. It requires user to complete and close before continuing with the main window. Example, save dialog box. Second one is modeless. It allows the user to switch between the dialog box and the main window as desired. Example, find dialog box. Now let us see message box function. This is a simple dialog box that displays a message and accepts a feedback from users only through the form of closing the dialog box. No text can be entered by the user. The user has no choice but to press the OK button to close this dialog box. Here is the example for closing window. The other dialog boxes present user with more than one choice to close the dialog box. The user is presented with three choices for closing the dialog box. The choice affects the action of the applications. Here is the example of three choices of dialog boxes. Next we move on. Syntax of message box function. msgbox, prompt, buttons, title, help file, context. Now let us see arguments of message box. Prompt. Prompt is the only argument that is required for the message box function. It is a string that is displayed in the message area of the dialog box. Next argument is buttons and title. The buttons and title bar customize the appearance of the dialog box. The next argument, an application can interact with a user by changing the optional buttons parameters of the message box function. The buttons parameter is a numeric expression that determines the following items: number and type of buttons, icon displayed, default button modality. The following table is clearly explained the commonly used values for the buttons parameters of the message box function. In buttons, if the user set the value 0, it will display OK button. In icons, the user set the value 16, it will display critical message icon. In default button, if the user set the value 0, the first button is default. In modality, if the user set 0 value, it will display VB application model. Now let us see the return values for message box function. The message box function returns a value. If user need to use the return value, store it in a variable with a data type of VB message box result. The below table shows that the return values for the message box function. Here is the example for return value of message box function. If the user clicked OK button, it will return the value 1. Next, we move on. InputBox function. The msgbox function creates dialog boxes that convey information to the user and can even interact with the user to give the user ability to supply any value they wish. Use the InputBox function. Now let us see the syntax for InputBox function. Now let us see arguments of InputBox function. The first argument is prompt. Prompt is the only argument that is required for the InputBox function. It is a string that is displayed in the message area of the dialog box. Next argument, button and title. The buttons and title bar customize the appearance of the dialog box. Next argument is X position and Y position. An X and Y position for the location of the dialog box on the screen is supplied using the X position and Y position arguments, which accepts the distance of the edge of the dialog box from the left and top of the screen respectively. Suppose if the user leaving out the X position, it will appear in center of the dialog box horizontally, while the user leaving out the Y position, the input box will display 1/3 of the way from the top of the screen. The input box returns a string value if the user clicks the OK button or press the enter key. The string contained in the text box is returned. But if the user clicks the cancel button or presses the escape key, an empty string is returned regardless of what the text box contains. Here is the example of input box function. Thank you. From this video lessons, we have learned a message box and dialog boxes in Visual Basic applications. Thank you one and all.